Welcome, everybody. We're going to be working in Unit 2 again today. And before we get into building our Apple Pie app, which is kind of the culmination of this unit, we're going to be working on the last couple, 2, 3 sections here in the book. Now, what I think is kind of interesting, because mostly, when I'm teaching this, I'm usually using the teacher guide as kind of my script or whatever, if you will, for running the course and for delivering the materials. But then as I started looking at the teacher guide, I noticed that, oh, wow, they don't have any instructions for how to build the app or any step-by-steps or anything like that. And then I looked at the student version, and of course, all that information is there. So last time what we did is we looked at all the basic user interface components in Unit 2. So like the lessons kind of preceding 2.9 basically were the ones we were looking at, and basically all that was is looking at like what types of views we have, what kind of controls we have, how they're applied, what settings you might choose for those. And that's all well and good looking at it like in a manual, right? But like actually using them makes a big difference in understanding what they are and how they operate. And there are a lot of nuances on this stuff. And this is an area that is rapidly developing. So I should probably point that out, that the way this stuff is being kind of proctored now by Apple and how they're pushing that you put stuff on the screen is kind of improving and changing continuously. So if you do learn how to do this, it doesn't mean you're done learning how to do this. It's gonna keep growing and changing, as the technology changes. What we're going to be looking at here is kind of stepping through this tutorial. So I'm going to be pulling that off to my other screen and using that as my guide as we do this stuff. I do already have Xcode launched. I have I think all the tools I need available up on my screen. So I am going to start by just pulling this over to the other screen. We'll get Xcode up. Here's the splash screen for Xcode. And let's just follow the instructions. So I'm on page 270 in the student book in Developing Swift Fundamentals, the regular book, not the teacher guide. So what we're going to be working on here is kind of talking about this as kind of an overview of, in some ways, how you even build an app and how you plan for it. And okay, so maybe I should have the book over here. All right, it's kind of silly, but here we go. I'm just gonna, rather than hide my notes like normally I would, like kind of have this on the other screen and talk through it. I see no reason to do that. I'm just gonna complete transparency here. I don't memorize this stuff. As a teacher, I kind of gave that up a long time ago. Like trying to script every moment and feel like exactly what I'm going to say every part of the the session. And you know what, as I learned to do that, I figured out that I can figure this out as I go. So can the students. I think that's a better approach. But generally what they're talking about here is when you're starting to build an app, you start with the planning process, and frankly, all apps start with an idea, right? And this is probably the most challenging part of building an app, is coming up with an idea that nobody else has built before, right? Especially if you want to have one that's successful, or coming up with an app that somebody has built before, but you think you can do it better or different or offer different features or whatever it is, right? And that makes a whole lot of sense. And see, they have a couple of these ideas here, like as examples. They say like send and receive messages, share photos with friends, post short messages. And when you start to build an app, you might have these little concepts as features in your app, right? And this is kind of the point of this. But what we're doing here, and they're saying we're going to build an app for introducing yourself. So this is like the hi, this is me app, right? So let's think about what that means, right? So they're pointing out, who are you? What's your life about? What does a day in your life look like, et cetera, et cetera. You don't have to put any more information into this, by the way, than you are feeling comfortable doing. But it's really more about learning all the controls, and how they are used in an app more than like what we're putting into the app. All right. So just keep that firmly in your head as we're moving forward. Now, sometimes when you're building an app, there's stuff that you put on the screen that you just put on the screen, just kind of like I put these words on the screen. I'm not going to be changing them or moving them or adjusting the fonts or anything like that. It's just information that's given. And we think of that as static information. And a lot of, app development initially starts with that kind of information. It's kind of like, okay, let's just get it up on the screen. That's a win in itself, right? Getting it later to do something, that reacts to user interface or whatever, and I think of it as like, they call it dynamic data here, but basically, when you do something on the screen and the app reacts, that comes after. Getting it on the screen first is step number one. And so what they're kind of throwing around here is something like this. So look at the example on the left here. They're talking about individuals, and first a little description about the person. You notice like it's kind of in a code format. So they have like about me is commented out, and then they say their names and little information about them. What does a typical day look like? So like maybe what you might do during the course of a day, what you want to be when you grow up or when you retire, in my case. And then some listing of favorites in terms of sports and food and whatever. Okay. So what they're kind of tasking you with is that we're going to put information up on the screen kind of like this, right? And you could be wise and pre-create it. That would probably be the smart approach. So like pause the video, type up a text file, and drop all this stuff into it about yourself. And, if I was maybe teaching this to like, high schoolers or something, I might like make that half a day of a class session or something. But, we're all adults here. We can kind of do it on the fly. Just keep in mind that, really what they're trying to tell you is that you need to have some information you're going to throw on the screen. It can be real, it can be facetious, it really doesn't matter. It's more about the process of doing it. All right, so we're going to start following their steps here, and I understand that they're going to want like some of this information. So worst case scenario, I'm just kind of putting it out there, you could come into the book and just copy this stuff and just use that. That could be one approach that you could use. So I just might do that if that's what they want to happen. But if the information is relatively simplistic, I may just type it in on the fly. We'll see how it goes. Let's follow the first instruction, which is to create a new Xcode project. We want to use the iOS app template, and then we'll worry about the settings as we kind of get rolling here. So I do have Xcode fired up. It's on the splash screen right now. Let me get some of this stuff out of the way here. And we're just going to go ahead and create a new Xcode project. We are going to build an iOS app. So go ahead and click next once you're there. We want to call the project hello. So I guess we could call this, this video could be the hello app build if that's what it is. And we do want to go with a storyboard, Swift, and we're not worried about these two things right now. Let's go ahead and click next. Where is it going to go? Wherever you want it to go. You could connect it up to your GitHub repository here. I'm just saving it locally. If you're wondering, this checkbox here, we don't talk about this much, but like if you do have a GitHub account, you can connect directly to it, right? So you can right to the cloud. If you prefer to do that in the aftermath, you can make the Git repository on your local machine and then move it later to the cloud or whatever. It doesn't really matter. The whole concept of using a repository, though, is that you have a way to store your stuff safely where you can find it, retrieve it, save the work in progress, etc. And if you were working professionally, you certainly would want to do that. Not a super huge concern right now. I am just going to create this right in the root of this folder, but I do want to do it. You can see this is from last semester. So I really want to go basically I think, up a level here. Let's see if I can fumble with my file manager here. And you know what? This is I guess the first raw app build that we're doing here. I'm just going to put it in the root here. That's where I'm going to decide to do it. And you can see I have both the student and teacher files here. This is fine as long as you know where to find it. I know it's going to be in this folder, so I'm putting it in the root. Let's just go ahead and do the create. All right, so we get this status screen that pops up here, and we can, pretty quickly close this at this point. We do want to go over to the main storyboard and get that up on the screen. And it says, open the main storyboard, and we're going to use this first screen to add your information because your app will always display the same data. So you can build your static data directly into your screen using labels or images in the interface building. But later on, we're going to learn how to do all this dynamically. So what we're trying to do here is basically what they're showing here in the book. So I'm just going to pull this over so you guys can see what I'm looking at. What they want us to do is to start adding some content to the screen. So think about this. We're putting static content on the screen. So what I'm going to need you to do basically is we're going to add an image. So if you can find an image of yourself, fantastic. We're going to put some text up at the top and some information down at the bottom. Ideally it would be all that information that you typed in before, but like I said, it's not really, that's not really what it's about. And what really the takeaway from this is how do you get stuff to line up, to be straight, to fit, etc. You can choose whatever mechanisms you want to make something like this appear, including like background colors and whatever. So my target right now is to kind of mimic what's on the screen, but to make it about myself and to have much better color choices. Because I think that orange is pretty painful when it comes right down to it. So just keep that in mind. Be kind to your users. For sure. All right. Let's go ahead and start putting some stuff up on the screen here. And what I noticed is they have the person's name real large at the top, and then a block of text at the bottom, and then an image. So the image can come after. Let's focus on the words first. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to use a label. A label is really a good container for static text, and that's really what it's designed for, is text that doesn't change. So let's just go ahead and type your name here. So in the attributes inspector, right in that second box, type in your name. So I'm going to do that myself here. Then I'm going to either press tab or enter to lock it in, and you can see that it changed on the screen. I think that it's kind of interesting because it was centered before, but adding my name made it uncenter. And I'm not talking about what alignment I chose here. This alignment applies to what's inside the container. What we're more concerned with is lining this up with the center of the app screen. So I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to change my font, and it looks like they used a fairly large font. So I'm just going to kind of keep clicking up and through. And I want you to notice as I change the font size, my centering on the screen also gets broken too. I'm only going to go a little bit larger here. That might be adequate. So I'm choosing a system font that's 28. If you're keeping tabs here. I can change the color. I can adjust the which font I'm using. I can change all of that. I think I'm going to just probably go with a color that makes sort of sense to me. Like this indigo is a kind of a nice color, kind of nice and dark. And I'm not sure if I'll keep that, but we'll find out. Also, feel free to go ahead and adjust some of the other settings here. So like if I go in here and I want to, let's say, for example, go with a different size or color or feature or whatever, that's really on you. If you want to get really kind of persnickety about it, you can come inside here, right? So you can click the little font palette thing. And right now we're using a system font. So it's like, okay, whatever your device is using, that's the font we'll use as the default, right? And that can be fine, right? However, you might want to choose maybe one of these other pre-configured ones. So I'm just kind of pointing them out, right? Like in terms of what it might be. So this is a title, right? So I could try large title. Okay, that was kind of an interesting effect, right? Let's try title 1, title 2, right? And if you happen to be like a web person, this is kind of like a H1, H2, H3 kind of thing. I think I'm gonna go with a large title. I think that looks all right. Could also do a headline. Well, it sure doesn't look like a headline, but yeah, I think you get the point here that there's some pre-configured styles that you can draw from. The other aspect that we want to do is always make sure that this is centered. If you want to change other aspects of this, right? So if you want to go back to, let's say, the system font to have more granular control over this, you can then choose, levels of boldness and stuff, where if you choose one of these pre-configured styles, that has all of its own settings built in already. So you're not going to get to adjust those. If you do want to adjust things, then you go with the system font. And then, like, for example, if I want to do bold, I do think that looks a little bit better. It also made my font a little bit bigger by switching to that one. I'm going to go with this. I think that's pretty good. Right. So that would be the one thing to do. Now, the other aspect is to try to get that like body text down here. And there is, like if I type the word text in here, there's a text field, but then there's also a text view, right? And it says, right. So this is a little bit larger text content is really, you can read the description right there. But this is still designed, and if you read this carefully, for gathering user inputs. Neither one of these really is appropriate. So which thing do we want to use in order to get the stuff on the screen? We're still going to stick basically with labels, so that's still the right tool in this case, even if it is seemingly limited, because when you're doing a label, and you drop it on your screen here, the first thing that you notice is like, oh my God, well, I can drop in a whole bunch of words here, right? And I don't know if you guys just caught what I did, but I typed in some nonsense text, pressed enter, text, enter, text, enter, text, enter. But then I come back to my screen here and all I see is this, right? And here's the problem, right? So the label by default is designed to label things. It's not really designed to be, like a paragraph. So if you wanted to display more text, you can increase the number of lines for rendering the text. And then when you come here and you expand the interface, you should be able then to include more lines of text inside here. So just for example, like if I'm, and you can type actually, thought you could, but this allows it to adjust to that alignment and allows you to put more stuff in there basically than you normally would. Now you can see I'm struggling with it a little bit, and I'm not sure why. And I don't know if it's because of the interface here, but I'm going to try a little bit of an experiment. And so, they had this text that was in the book, and yes, and I know my name's not this person's name. So there's the text I copied in, and right, and what I'll do here is I'm gonna basically take that multi-line text, and you kind of get the idea here, right? So you just paste in multi-line text and it should work. So this is, I think, one of the reasons why they wanted you to do it externally. And then I'm noticing here in the box, you notice how like I copied it from the book, so they like grab all the citation information here too. Yeah, so let's just do that. And really the quotes don't matter either. And you know what? If I wanted to change this, of course, I can come in here and just put in my own name. Sorry, Cynthia. See, I'm an instructor, not a student. And I play guitar. I love animals. I'm looking for a retirement. I gotta have fun with it, I don't know, I will say 10 years, trying to be realistic here. I'll probably keep working for a while yet. Location would be, Milwaukee. Located, well, not Milwaukee, California, but Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm just wonderful this time of year. And my website, my favorite website is whatever. There you go. And and the bottom line is what's inside this box doesn't really matter. It's really just get the words on the screen. And then what we're really more concerned about is trying to get it to look good, to center, to adjust to the margins, etc. All those pieces, and to have practice with it. Let's also go ahead and find an image of yourself. And you know what, here I am on a school issued machine where I probably don't have any images of myself. And if I do, it's probably not a great one. So how about we do this? I'm going to pause here for a moment and I'm going to see if I can find like a headshot of myself to throw in. All right, I did locate a headshot of myself, and we are going to need to get the image up on the screen. I don't know if you guys remember how to do this or not, but we're going to use an image view to do that. So we'll come up here and grab one. Just drag it on, try to drop it kind of strategically here. And I do want to make it kind of largish, not too big. And then I'm looking at my headshot, looking at its orientation, and my headshot's kind of square-ish. So I'm kind of, redesigning that a little bit there. Okay. The other thing that we want to do is we want to go to this assets panel and we want to grab that image and pull it in. I did just download it, so I had to go into my Google Drive or somewhere or other and find a headshot to grab. So there it is. Yes, I only have one format for this, but you do notice that they have like sizes basically that you can drop in. So if you have higher res versions, it really does help apps quite a bit. So if you want to use as efficient an image as possible, but you also want to have the opportunity to upscale it if necessary. So there's my headshot. And then back on the main storyboard, we want to take that headshot and we want to put it here, right in that image view. And I don't know if you guys remember how to do that, but you highlight your image view here, and then you should be able to pull up your assets from just a little drop down here if you've done it correctly. And so there it is, in all of its glory. It's not like the most, and I'm not claiming this is beautiful, but we're just practicing getting stuff on the screen and kind of just strengthening those skills. That's what this is about. The background color, if you want to kind of tinker with that a little bit, you can use whatever you wish, and I'm kind of partial to purple these days, or shades of it. You can also choose a custom color. So if you don't like what the system is giving you, you can use any one of these color picking tools here to kind of pick the color you want. And I'm going to kind of play with some colors. I like that purple, but you can see it's not very good with my name, right? So I like kind of like those deep indigos, maybe right around there somewhere. So we'll just go with that. But now, yes, my font is not going to work. So let's change that color. A really, strong suggestion is you always want contrast between your backgrounds and your foregrounds, and the greater the contrast, the more readable it is. You can see, well, this is black, but that's a lot harder to read than if it was something, lighter colored that contrasts with the background. You may or may not like that. You can make whatever choice you want. I'm thinking that what might help this a little bit is if I bumped up the font size a little bit, and I'm going to say maybe even if I made it sort of like semi-bold, a little bolder, it looks a little nicer. And then I'm also going to expand the text here. And I want you to notice that what's happening is some of this is kind of getting cut off. And so I'm going to use a little trick here. I'm going to go Shift Enter, if it takes it, that is. No, it's not taking it. Right, there is a trick for this, and I'm trying to recall what it is. Maybe it's Command Enter, Option Enter. There you go. Option Enter is the trick. So when you're inside a text block like this, it's Option Enter to go to a new line. See what is happening to me here, though? My stuff is getting cut off. So this isn't like a super elegant way to do this, right? And I think you guys are kind of seeing that. Be mindful of the shape of your container as you're working. How many lines do I have in here? 7. Okay, no wonder it was cutting me off. So this reminds me of, like, if you're not happy with the number of lines that you're limited to, one option that you have is you can set this to 0. And that's really kind of the grand point of this. And once you set it to 0, then you can put as much stuff in there as you want. And it just will automatically and dynamically adjust, I believe, right? So notice how pensive I was in saying, I believe it will. So there you go. I mean, this is very, very goofy. Now this is okay. This is the whole app, right? This is pretty much it. I don't know if they really have any more instructions for us, but this is, remember, just to practice those skills, putting everything up on the screen. Now, the other thing that we want to kind of worry about here is, why, when we're putting the stuff on the screen and moving it around, why does it always have this one, you can go to the edge of the screen, but this blue line that appears right now, that one is really kind of what we call the safe area. So there's a kind of like a safe area in the app. And I'm just going to use the image here to kind of make my point. I'm going to move it around. So there's safe area at the top, safe area on the right, safe area on the bottom. And what generally they're trying to keep us to do is stay within, those particular areas. They really want you to stay out of the status area at the top. Why? Because, well, if you have an iPhone, right, or an iPad, and you have one of these little, like, camera bump outs or whatever, you will notice that there's information up here, like, your connection to your cellular network, your battery strength, the time, there's little details that pop up here. So that's why you don't want to be up there, because you are going to conflict with the other things on the screen. The same thing happens at the bottom too. where often we have app controls down here. And if they're not from the app that you're using, they're from maybe an app that's, bringing up your app, or, there might be a keypad or something down there. The left right is really just kind of a matter of practicality, because if you get too close to the edge of the screen, and especially if you have a clickable item, it might be difficult to click on it or manipulate it. So that's why they kind of want you to stay out of those area. The takeaways here, by the way, is stay within the safety margins, create a nice amount of space between your objects. So be mindful, like when I'm working with like an image like this, does it look good when it's like this? It doesn't, does it? Give space to things. And this is one thing, like when I teach web stuff, which is my primary thing, that's a hard one for me to teach to people, because everybody just wants to get it on the screen and make it fit. And then when you look at it, you go, oh my God, well, it fits, but it doesn't look good. So that's, you need somewhere in between, right? Visually creating space between objects, like even what I did here, where I added a blank line between these. Do you see how like that makes this line easier to read than this stuff, right? And so that's the kind of thing we're talking about, is create enough space to make it look comfortable, is a good way to say it. Right. Use the built-in guides to line up to center. And yeah, you can do it with your mouse like this. That's one way to do it. What you're going to start discovering, though, is we have these panels down here that we can also use. And that's kind of where we're going with this stuff too. All right. I think that we covered all the different major components of this. But one I do want to talk about is a little bit about this, like the image and how it fits inside of this box. And you guys noticed that when I downloaded my image, so I had to go like into my Google Drive and find this, and I opened it. And this is actually a picture that my son took of me. I had kind of like it's like, darn it, I need a headshot and I don't have like a good one. And so I just had him take me outside, snap a quick picture with his digital camera. He's a pretty good photographer. And he what was neat about it is he only took a couple shots, to get this one. If you ever try to take pictures of yourself or somebody else's, that doesn't know what they're doing is taking pictures, it can sometimes be a little bit of a thing. But, get a nice picture of yourself to have handy, by the way, is always a good thing. Because I've had many circumstances, whether it's like a social media profile, or like I'm going to a conference and they need a picture of me. And I always hate those ones where you're in a suit and you got like a generic background. So we just took this one outside, right? And I thought it turned out pretty nice, pretty accurate of what I looked like a couple of years ago. And I've only gotten better looking since then, right? Okay, so the reason I'm kind of, when I brought this shot in, obviously this is not how the shot looked originally when he took it. The shot was, in a wide format, so it was wider than this. I did crop it to crop out parts of the background I didn't want in there, and also to zoom in on myself a little bit more. And I could argue I could be maybe even more tightly focused. I could probably use a little Photoshop work too on all my beautiful markings on my face, or whatever, called wrinkles, right? But I'm actually pretty accepting of what I look like. But here, when we drop this in, there is this mode button, and I want you to notice all the different settings. So like if you had dropped in the image view here, and you notice how I'm like changing the size of the image view, but it's not changing my image, right? And this is kind of the important thing here, is playing with these settings. So if you drop an image view and you want it to go from safety zone to safety zone and be centered, which it is, you do have these other options. Right now it's set to aspect fit. And what this one does is it keeps the aspect ratio. The aspect ratio is however big the length is and the height, or the width and the height, if you want to look at it that way, numerically in terms of pixels, they are correct for what originally came off well, my file. It's not off what came off the camera, but what came out of my file. And so I'm not changing that perspective, right? If I start changing the perspective, so for example, if you start choosing some of these other ones, this one keeps the aspect ratio correct, but fills the whole frame. Not sure I like it so much. I think, adjust myself inside of there. Actually, that's adjusting the whole thing. I'm not liking it, right? I could center it. Okay, well, oh my God, right? That's horrible. Okay, I'm not even going to say what I'm thinking. We can go left, we can go bottom left, and what it's doing, right, is it's taking the photograph and it's going to that part of the photograph, and I don't know how it's deciding to scale it, but man, it is not good, right? We can do a scale to fill. This is one that people often choose mistakenly, and a lot of, when I see a lot of young web designers like first put images on the screen, this is a common problem too. It's like, hey, you want to fill that space, but your picture's not the right shape for it, so you end up stretching your photograph. And if you know what the original looks like, you're like, oh man, that's not what he looks like, because it's not, right? However, it can have its place. This is not the right place for it. I think that if most people are going to scale to fill, they want to make themselves look narrower, not wider. The book makes a whole point of this. So if I had an image here that was actually wider than it was tall, and I did this setting, then it would probably stretch the other direction, so it'd probably stretch tall. I'm not a fan of that. So choose what you think is best, and I'm thinking usually these two settings usually tend to work pretty well. If you need some other thing to happen, then what's always best, and I just kind of point this out, it in my opinion, it's always best to adjust the image before you bring it into where its destination is. Because if you're doing that in like Lightroom or Photoshop or whatever photo editor you use, you have a lot more control over it than you do here. Here, yeah, you can do stuff to it, but it is limited, so don't feel like you're locked in. If you're wanting to do like really goofy things like adjust like opacity, okay, so this is what alpha means. And you'll notice here, I'm going to start dropping the opacity down. Really what it does is it's making it more transparent. And what's in the background? Purple is in the background. So I'm just letting more purple through. But that's kind of a neat effect. So in some cases, you can utilize that opacity. Here's kind of an idea. Like if you have your logo or your name, right? And you notice I'm dropping it on here, but right now, what ended up happening is it's behind the photograph, and we haven't really talked about this feature a lot, but you can actually move that to the foreground. And I'm trying to think of how do we do that here in Swift. And if you guys find it faster to me, please let me know. But there's a way to bring that forward. And it is in one of these panels here. Yeah, so right here. So I thought that was in the panel, so I apologize that I'm not finding it there, and maybe it is, and I'm just not seeing it. But I'm gonna I have the text object or the label selected, and I'm gonna bring it to the front so you can see it. But you could, for example, if you're working with something like that, you could adjust the opacity on the name, and then you start seeing the photograph come through the name. That's kind of a neat effect. I'm not saying that you necessarily have to do that, but I'm really trying to teach you about alpha. And the other thing I'm really trying to teach you about as well is this concept of like spacing, opacity, placement, all that stuff. So just take that all with a grain of salt. All right, I'm going to pause the video right here. All right, so that's kind of the hello app. And you know what, it's worthy of, you know, at least running this. And yes, this is really boring, it doesn't do anything, but it is really kind of a matter of learning how to get stuff up on the screen. So I am doing a build of it, and it's going to launch here in the simulator, and let's just make sure that it loads up correctly and looks roughly like what we designed, right? If there's things about it you don't like, right, change it. You know, I mean, it's just kind of as simple as that. So this is really a very primitive little thing. I'm kind of waiting for the simulator to load it. I don't know why it's taking so long. There we go. All right. That first launch of that simulator, right, is a thing. Now, it is all on the screen. I think it's pretty readable. I think the purple is not a great color choice. You know, now that I look at it, I kind of, the bigger it gets, the less I like it. So, you know, really kind of a lesson there too, which is um, a lot of strong color can be not a good thing, right? It might seem like a good thing, but I don't think it really makes it more readable, right? So careful with color choice. You can see the safety area at the top that we're avoiding and why we're avoiding it. And would this look as good if the image went all the way to the edges? You know, you can argue either way on that, right? But I would be really, really cautious on that for a lot of different reasons. But it did work. So that would be the first part of this exercise, is to finish that. I'm going to go ahead and hit the stop run on this. I'm going to close this project. And then the next project that they're kind of working on here is this one. So they go through and they, you know, they show all the different aspects of the things that we worked on here. And the next lab is basically to do something like this, right? So basically what they're hoping, you know, and I'm pretty reluctantly going to proceed with doing some of this because I feel like it doesn't really go very far. But just this idea of like creating an app about something you're interested in, having images of it, and then getting it on the screen. So like I'm like being really practical here in my head. And so this is what I'm going to say here is that I'm not going to do this one. Not that you're not able to do it, but I would recommend that you try doing it just for practice, right? So really what you're supposed to do is to create a project and have images of something that you're interested in. So for me, it would probably, like, I could just like take, you know, pictures of my guitars, for example, and post them here, right? And the practice would be to find the images, create the project, create a bunch of image views, create a bunch of labels, and get that all up on the screen and get them all to line up and look nice. And then, you know, really kind of start building the app to do stuff, you know, in the aftermath. Now, what we're going to do here is in this next one, and that's where so I'm skipping over that one, is what I'm telling you. But you can go ahead and do that. All right. If you want more practice on it, that's really kind of up to you. So like if I was teaching this like in a high school format, and I'm saying this to my college students, where we have more in classroom time, I would probably just make them do this for busy work, right? I think what we just did with the personal one kind of covers it. You know, one would be like an in-class demo, and one would be kind of like a classroom activity for younger people. With this next one, what we want to do is we're going to follow this process here. So we're going to create a new project, and we are going to call it Common Input Controls. And we're going to play with some things. And this time we're going to play a little bit with code. So this is kind of basic, but we are going to utilize this. So here we go. Back over in Xcode. Let's create a new project. iOS app. And we're going to call this Common Input Controls. And this is to get comfortable with these controls. Yeah, I'm going to put it right in that root folder there. That's fine. We're going to close the status screen here. All right, go to the main storyboard. And we try to do this efficiently here as much as I can. We're being asked to add a button. I'm just going to drag a button on, drop it somewhere around there. They're saying drag the button onto the scene, place it about a third away from the top of the screen, and then open the assistant editor to see the corresponding view control file. Now, if you guys remember, this is the file that we want to look at. If you want the assistant editor, so this is what they mean by this, and I think it's option. If you option click that, it opens up the code file, and thankfully I chose the right button, right? It opens up the code file in a separate space, and so I do find it helpful that if I'm working both visually and with code to kind of have like kind of a setup like what you see on the screen here, where I can see all my panels, see my code, see my controllers, see my assets, all of that on the same screen. All right. Let's move on to, so if you're following along in the book, I'm in the student version of the book, and I'm moving on to page 290 right now. All right, so now we're going to do a control drag. So we've done this a bunch of times from the button to the view controller. And I'm going to actually first here in the view controller file, create some space to do the control drag. I'm also going to do that technique where, we start to mark the code, right? And I'm trying to remember how to do this. I'm going to do a mark, say ID actions. Right, so I'm going to take this button and I'm going to control drag from here to here and let go. Yeah, and I of course read the instructions after the fact. So I'm going to actually cancel this. And what they really do prefer, and so they're saying here, if you're going to do IB actions, you really should put them below the view did load. That's just kind of their operating paradigm. So I have no reason not to follow what they're suggesting. But up here, we usually do our outlets, if you guys remember. So like, just as a matter of practice, even if we're not doing it right now, real common kind of marking to put in. And the marks, by the way, when you drop them in, they just kind of indicate how you're grouping stuff together in your code. We're going to put our stuff down here. So when we control drag, we're going to control drag down to here. So let's try that again. I'm going to click on button, then control drag and let go. All right, we're going to call this button tapped, which is of course the default action for a button. We're going to make sure you're set on action up here. That should have happened automatically. Should go to the view controller. We're naming it button tap. The UI interface component any. There is also UI button, and for right now, any is actually fine. Either one would work, by the way. The event would be touch up inside. That's kind of a weird way to put it, but that's kind of what a button press is. And the arguments are from the sender. Then you just go ahead and you click connect. Right. It's connected, of course, because the circle is filled, right? And when I hover over it and click, it shows me in the view what it's connected to. Now, what's kind of interesting about the touch up inside thing, the book says it's the default control when you create an action from a button. And this is really kind of important. Any control you put on the page that will have interactivity will have a default action associated with it. A buttons is touch up inside. A slider would be sliding the slider. So you guys feel like what I'm saying here, like what the control is dictates what its default action is. And it's usually pretty logical. There's other things that you can do as well. So for example, if I click that button, you know, and you look over here, somewhere in this panel here, when we're looking at the actions, and this is really where I mean to be, we are looking for, you know, what happens with that action. And there are a number of different actions that you can trigger. And, you know, when we were adding it, there's a whole drop down that appears. There is one in that panel, by the way, where it says primary action triggered, right? And so instead of you specifically saying touched up inside, if you said primary action triggered, it really means the same thing, because that's the default action for that button, if that makes sense. So sometimes programmers will opt to choose an option like that rather than what we did. Now, what we're going to do is we are just going to do something really simple here with this. And we're just going to make it print something on the screen when it does that. Now, I'm just going to go inside the func here, add a line of code, and we're just going to do a print command. Here's the question. Where does this print to? Well, the answer is it prints to the console. So in a GUI app, here's the second question. Do the users see the console? And the answer is, of course, no, they do not at all. So, all right, let's try this, right? So I'm going to go ahead and run this. The simulator will pop up here. So let's give it a second. All right, so it gives it a second to launch, boot up and run. All right, there's our fancy button. Now I'm going to go ahead and click the button, and you notice there's the console output. So we are triggering an action, but it's hidden to the user. The user doesn't see it on the app, but it tells you something about the console that's kind of interesting. When we first learn how to code, we do everything in the console because we don't know anything else, right? And then you figure out, okay, well, that's not how real apps and applications work. We have a GUI that the user uses, and then we have a console that we can still print to for some reason. And what's the point of it? Well, the point of it is that becomes useful for the programmer and for the admins, for example. So like a program's running, and for example, you have maybe a bunch of messages that are being printed to the console that keep track of what's happening in the app. And then that stuff might eventually end up in the log file, you know, so it becomes administratively useful for the app developers or for keeping track of things. And so for us, that shows that the button is working, and that if I click on it, that I can make something happen, and it's indeed happening. So I think that's kind of an interesting little aspect of that, right? So like if you guys weren't aware of that feature before, there you go. All right, now let's go back. Let's stop the app from running, and let's try a couple of other controls, you know, so that's kind of like where we're going with this. Is I'm gonna now try a switch. So let's come here to the object library and choose a switch. I'm just going to drag that onto the screen. I'll put it right underneath the button. Right. And right now, right, so it drops on there with the switch turned on, by the way. So that's kind of like the default mode for it. So we can set up an object like this that, depending on its position, we can check to see if its position is on or check to see if its position is off. And relative to where it sits, we can run different code. And because that's kind of like an either or action, I'm hoping your brain is kind of in the mode now where you know enough code and you're like, well, that sounds like an if else. If it's on, do this, else do that, right? I mean, it makes a whole lot of sense. Right. So get the object onto the screen. We already did that. Now we're going to go ahead and trigger an action for that. So we're going to control drag it over. So drop it down. Don't put it inside the other action. We are going to name this, and I'm trying to see what they're naming it. We're going to call it switch toggle, right? And if I had, let's say, 20 switches on a page, I would name it. So I would say like first switch, second switch, or important switch, not important switch, whatever. The name would be included. But notice how I'm naming the action as to relative to the condition of the object, right? With the button, it was button tapped. With the switch is toggled on or off. So that's why I'm naming it that way. All right. All the other settings are okay. I'm just going to click connect. We are connected, as we can see, right? And then inside here, we're just going to write some really simple code. So we'll say if sender, what's the sender? The switch, or the switch. And then we'll run this property check to see if it's on. Is it on or off? This is going to yield a Boolean result, right? So it's going to be either true or false. Checks to see, is it flipped over to the right or is it over to the left? If it is on, then we're going to just do a little quick print statement here and say the switch on. I'm sure you can guess the rest of this, right? Otherwise, we'll have an else and we'll say print switch. Simple, like very straight ahead. Let's check and see if it works. So up to the run here, it says build fail. Oh, and all right. So I goofed here. When I added this IV action, the sender was set to any, and I didn't pay attention. And really, this needs to be changed. Now, here's where it's kind of interesting. Normally, I would just do this from the panel, but let's see if I change it manually here to UI switch, if the error will go away. It looks like it did. All right, let's run again. Let's see if that fixed the error. Okay, looks like it's fixed the error. The switch is starting in the on position, right? If I flip it, the switch is off, flip it back, switch is on, off, on, off, on, and I can also get my button to display to the console tool. Now, even though this is primitive, right? Like these controls are primitive, they are working. And that's really kind of a critical thing, and more importantly, practice with them. I do want to show you though, if you're wondering, this started out on, is that how we want it? Maybe not. So you can change its startup state to off, so if you want to switch it to off, so it starts off, and then you could run and build again, and it'll pop up like this. So in this case, it starts in the other state. And whether it's on or off depends on what your application is doing. There's some situations where you want to have it start on, or it doesn't really matter. But just consider that you're in control. That's really kind of the grand takeaway. All right, moving on. Let's try a slider next. So I'm going to come up here, object library. I'm going to find a slider. Well, that's kind of interesting. All right, I'm going to just type slower then. Why did it do that? Oh, I know why. This is pretty interesting, actually. Right now, as I'm bringing up this library tool, and I'm going to press escape to get out of it. What file am I in? Where am I at? Yeah, I'm in the view controller. You guys noticing that? And that means when I bring up the object library tool, it's going to bring up because I'm in a code file, watch what it does. It brings up code snippets. Like if I want to, like, for example, add an if statement, it's got a setup for it, and I can add that if statement to my code, right? Okay, that's not what we're doing here, though. We want to be in the graphical storyboard and the user interface builder, basically, and then watch how the selections change. Now the selections here are all relative to these types of objects. So I'm going to grab a slider and bring it over and drop it on the screen. Notice how it ends up right in the middle. We're once again going to do a control drag. We're going to add a new action. We'll add it down here at the bottom. We are going to make this, or name this, I should say, slider value change. So what happens when you move the slider? Well, the value of the slider changes, whatever your scale is. We also want to switch this, like we did with the previous control, to UI slider. Otherwise, the code really isn't going to work. All right. And then go ahead and click connect. All right. So now we have our new function here. Now, interestingly, the slider. All right. So let me actually click on the slider here. And as you look over here at the attributes inspector, it does have some default values. Like right now, the slider's in the middle. Its minimum value, if I go all the way to the left, is 0. Its maximum is 1. So its ranges from 0 to 1, right? However, we can change those values. We can set them to be whatever we want them to be logically. This is just the default, right? I'm not going to change that default. I just want to make you aware of that. So if you wanted your slider to go from 0 to 100, well, that's on you, right? To choose that. And then what value it starts at is also on you. Maybe you want it to start at 0. Maybe you want it to start in the middle. It doesn't really matter. You're the programmer. You control it. Okay. There are a bunch of things here you can do to style this if you wish, and you can play with that to your heart's content. Right now, what we're really looking to do is just see if we can pull a value off of that slider. So what we're going to do is we'll issue a print command, and inside here, we're just going to say sender.value, and we're just going to print to the console whatever that slider is generated when we move it. Okay, that's the little catch there. So here's the run. All right, so right, and if watch the console. So notice I moved it ever so slightly, and more interestingly, okay, so I'm moving it a lot, and as it's sliding, and this is what I find fascinating about the slider thing, is you figure as you're moving it, it's only going to give you a value when you stop moving it. But the truth is, when I slide it, it's giving me a continuous range of values, and I don't know if this is really picking up in the video well, or in the screen share, honestly. But as I'm moving it, every time I change a value, it picks it up. It doesn't matter. Like, for example, if I click on it just in position and don't move it, it still grabs the value, right? So it kind of tells you how the control works too, that just by touching it or tapping it a little bit, it still picks up the value, even if you're not moving it. But all the way to the right, you get 1.0. All the way to the left, you get 0, right? And then we started out at 0.5 but notice how much precision there is. I mean, there's like 8 decimal places of precision. So it's not an imprecise control, kind of a neat one. All right, let's do also a text field. So we're going to add, so once again, I'm doing that code snippet thing. Sorry about that. Storyboard. Yeah, I should probably stop the app from running. We will find a text field, not text, drop it on. In this case, we're going to allow people to type into the box. I'm not doing anything really fancy with this, right? But let's set up an IB action for the text field. So here it comes. I'm just dragging it down here. We'll call it, okay, so this is what the author is suggesting. Keyboard return key tapped. So in other words, It's not going to change anything until you type and then hit return. We do also want to switch this over to UI text field. And in terms of the event, it says editing did end. How does it know that it ended? Well, you pressed return. But notice that you can choose any one of these other actions. That is the default action. So if I choose this one, these two are basically the same, but this one makes sure it happens. And sender is fine. So let's go ahead and connect. That looks good. And then inside here, all we're going to do is we're just going to say print whatever they typed in, right? So type something in, they're going to hit enter, and it's going to appear down in the console. Now, what's kind of interesting about this is we can also have it trigger code when the user edits the content of the field. So like they're going to type it in, hit enter, it's going to appear in the console. But what if they go back and change it? Well, okay. We can add another action here. Well, this is kind of interesting. Okay, so it's not liking this little bit. All right, so here's because I'm missing some code. So this is my bad here. So I really need an if statement. So I'm going to say if let. So in other words, we're going to assign a constant if this rings true, and that is if the sender actually put some text in there, then we will print that text to the console. Like that. You know what? Let's try just this. All right, so I'm going to just run this part of it, and then we'll do the second part to follow. So here's the text box. I'm going to type, and then I'm going to press enter. I'm pressing it. I'm not really sure why it's not working. Okay, that's kind of a separate issue here. But the reason I think it's not working is because I'm doing this from the operating system and not from inside the app. Right? I'm not pressing the app keyboard. I'm pressing the operating system keyboard. All right, so this is kind of a separate little issue here. So how do I invoke the iOS keyboard in this environment? And there is a command for that. I don't remember what it is. So just bear with me here a sec. So of course I forget how to do this, so I have to Google it, but that's okay, you know. But here, okay, so I have to be in the simulator. So let's go to the simulator, and here on IO, I can toggle the software keyboard. Right, so I can bring it up on screen like this, and I know my text box is hidden right now, and then hit return, right? So this is not a great example because all my controls are hidden. Why don't we do this? All right, so I'm gonna be kind of smart here. And so on my app, I'm gonna take all my controls and I'm just gonna slide them up so I can make sure I can see them. I know it's really kind of a silly way to do it, but that way I can make sure that I'm in the text field. So I'm gonna toggle the keyboard. I'm going to click in here, type. Well, that's kind of interesting, right? Because now, so here's what happened. Of course, I'm on a computer, so I default go right to my keyboard to type and not to the software keyboard to type. So there's the software keyboard. So I'm just going to type some letters and hit return, and it should output here. It's not doing it. The other, the keyboard command shortcut for this, so inside the simulator is Command K, right? So it can trigger the keyboard. So that's kind of a neat little thing. Just kind of a side takeaway from this, right? Like inside, you know, this simulator environment, this is a fully functioning simulated environment. So the other kind of tip I'll give you is like you can come in here, you can bring up Safari, and you can surf the web like right inside the simulator, by the way. And some people do that. Okay, so that's not working, and I'm not really quite sure why. So let's see if we can figure out why it's not working. So I'm going to try to get the book back up on the screen here. All right, so I'm just looking at their instruction set on this one, and I'm trying to see what my differences are. I named my function the same. Sender's a UI text field, so that should all be okay. But here's what I think I'm going to do. I think I'm going to delete this action. So I'm just going to come in here and delete it. All right, and you notice how the connection went away. I'm going to redo this because I'm noticing at one instruction, one of the instructions was we should use the primary action triggered event for the view controller. All right, so let's try that again. Text field, control drag. We're going to name it keyboard turn key tapped. This is going to be a UI control. In the event, we're going to go to primary action triggered. And the argument is still the sender. And we're going to connect. And then once again, we're going to write the code inside here that says if let text equals sender dot text. So it's reading it from the app. And then we're just going to print that text into the console. Now, I want you to notice, because I was messing with this and deleting it probably the way I probably shouldn't have been doing it. It doesn't like it at all, right? It's not connecting. So I do need to go here and look at my outlets. And we want to look at this object. And you notice here that this one is still in play, even though I manually deleted it. So I do have to come in here and actually delete it. Will this now fix this one? It doesn't look like it, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that one too and try again. You know, I also have this breakpoint that I dropped in there accidentally. I'm going to delete that. Let's try that one more time. I'm just going to delete all this and redo it. You know, so for whatever that's worth, you know, you guys are noticing that sometimes this stuff does not work great. And then you have to kind of go through these actions. Let's try it again. Keyboard return key tapped. And so you do this a bunch of times, you start getting good at it. And let's connect. And okay, this time we have the connection. And then let's try that if let statement again. If let text equals sender text. And then we need our curly brackets here. It's going to say print. All right. Now let's give it a try. Here comes the run. All right. Toggle the keyboard, Command K. And I am getting a message here, and it says failed to fetch this property for sender ID. Use primary keyboard info instead. Okay. I'm not really sure what exactly that means, but I guess we're going to find out the hard way, right? So Command K to bring up the keyboard. I'm just going to, use one of these words here and hit return. Hey, it worked. All right. All right. So if I type in more in Command K and hit return, all right, that's working. So you see that it is working now. All right. So that was the first part. Let's now try the second part, which is we're going to add another action here. And here's where I get a little perplexed by this, frankly, because I'm going to add another action to the same text field. Do I do a new control drag, or do I just write the code? Right. So my gut instinct tells me I should do a control drag to make sure it's connected. So I'm going to drop this down here, and this time we're going to call it text changed. It is going to be a UI control. And this time, which one of these are we going to be triggering off of? Editing did end, I think. So I'm like, no, I think editing changed makes more sense, right? If we're changing the text, yeah, that's got to be correct. And yep, the book says the same thing. Okay, so I'm glad kind of figured some stuff out, right? And so this time we're going to kind of do the same thing. So in other words, if the text changes, it's going to trigger some code also. And once again, we're going to do an if let here. So we're going to say if let the text equals the sender dot text. In other words, hey, they changed the text, so we're going to let the text be whatever they changed it to. That's what it says. And then we're going to output it on top of it. So if it works, we'll output the changed text. Let's test it. All right. Software keyboard. Oops, that we got to do that over here. So I tried to do it inside of thing, not a smart move, right? So type a bunch of stuff. Okay. And then if I change the text, I want you to notice what's happening now. If you look at the console, as I just alter what's in there, it just picks it up and writes it right to the console. So character by character change is recorded. This is kind of an interesting thought here, right? So it recognizes when anything changes. Oh, they changed one letter. Okay, well, they picked it up, right? And you can trigger code off of that. So pretty neat, I think. All right, so that one worked too. Let's keep moving on here. We're getting kind of closer to the end of this now. The other thing, okay, so these were all actions. So we created, or we didn't create them, we added controls to our app. We had actions that would trigger off of using that item either in a default or non-default way, and then trigger code from those actions. We're also going to play with the outlets a little bit, and we're going to create outlets for the toggle and the slider, both. All right, so let's kind of do that, but we're going to do the, and see, I marked this actions up here, and this should really be outlets, right? So we put actions at the bottom and outlets up top. So IB outlets and IB actions. So we'll put our outlets up here. Yeah, and they're making this like note here that developers usually put their outlets at the top and usually put their actions at the bottom. For whatever reason, that's just kind of like the convention. Mind you, not a rule, but a convention. I always suspect that when people have conventions, they stem from, things that they had to do. So we're going to take this little item here, and I'm switching over. Right? All right, so we're going to take the toggle switch first, and that's going to be an outlet. And let's just call this toggle. We'll switch with UI switch, that's fine, and we will do a connect. Just make sure it looks like that. And then we'll do another one here with the slider. So here's my control drag. and make sure it's set to outlet, by the way. Let's just name that slider. UI slider is fine, and connect. Okay, so we have both of our outlets. So now what we're going to do is, because we have these two objects here on the screen, we are going to update now our actions down below to help control those objects on the user interface. So find the button tapped. All right. And here right now we say button was tapped. But what if, when you tap the button, it will also check to see if the switch is on or off, right? So let's do that. So here inside this code, we can borrow this code. And drop it inside here. All right. All right. The difference here is, okay, so you see I copied it in on purpose, but it doesn't recognize the sender here because the sender is the button tap. So now we can look at the toggle. So this kind of gives you a little bit of a clue as to why we're doing this. So if I wanted from one control, if I press the button on one control to look at the state of a different control, I need to have an outlet for it for that to happen. That's why we added that. So now that toggle has an outlet, now I can kind of utilize that in other areas, right? So if you run this, and I know this isn't really super fancy stuff, but it is important in terms of functionality. So when I hit the button, right, it tells me that the button was tapped, but it's also checking the switch at the same time, right? And that's happening because of this and the outlet that we created. All right, let's stop that from running. We're getting close to the end here. So as soon as we finish these, I think it's just a few more pages of stuff. We're going to take a break, by the way, because I know we've been going for a bit. All right, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is what we call a gesture recognizer, and there's a bunch of them. Okay, so this is kind of an interesting thought here. I'm on the storyboard right now. I am going to collapse my console down, and I'm going to click here, and I'm going to type gesture, right? And as I type that correctly, you're going to see a bunch of the different gesture recognizers that pop up. And so like your phone doesn't like magically do like pinch and zoom and all those like weird gestures that you're seeing up on the screen. These are things that programmers add intentionally. And just take a look at the ones that are available here. These are the main gestures, right? So you have a tap, a pinch, a rotate, a swipe, a pan, screen edge pan, long press gesture, and custom. So you can actually customize one, which I think is kind of neat. And as you kind of look at these, right, it describes how they work, right, if you're not familiar. But you have this custom one, which I always find kind of interesting because you can create your own gesture that maybe doesn't exist, right? Like multiple fingers or, whatever the case may be. All right, so we're going to do something more on the basic side here. We're going to add a gesture recognizer on top of your views controller's view. And we're just going to grab basically the first one that they have listed there. So we're going to take the tap gesture recognizer and add that. All right, so here's the thing, right? So where are we going to add this to? All right, so let's pull up that library again. And I'm reading the instructions on this real frankly, because it's not necessarily clear to me either. Okay, so once again, I'm in the code page. I want to be on the view, right? So be careful, right? So there it is. All right. And we're going to drag this, and notice how it doesn't go to like any object. It goes to the whole screen, right? Right. And if you notice up top here, there's all these different little things, but we're going to go right on top of the view is where we want to be. So what's going to happen is that gets added over here to the document outline. If you click on that, you will bring up this little panel on the side here. And you can control it from here. So you can, so notice this is kind of interesting. So it'll let you choose how many taps you're looking for. You're looking for a double tap, a triple tap, a single tap, you know, or a touch. How many touches are we looking for? We do want to leave these both at 1 for this particular thing. So now it says using the assistant editor, add an IB action from the recognizer to the view controller. So we're going to go from here, right, over to the view controller file. And this is going to be an action. So it's going to go at the bottom. So I'm going to move it down here. So I'm making a little room for it right now, so I know where to go with it. I'm also kind of scrolling to kind of put it in a spot where it's going to be easy to control drag. And so let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to control drag over from there to here, right? You can see action. The object is the view controller. And we want to make sure, I think we want to use the UI tap gesture recognizer. Yep, that's the one we want to use. All right. We want to give it a name too, I guess. So let's give it respond. Spell that right though. Respond to tap gesture. And then we will click connect. All right, so there it is. And then inside here, we're just going to do something really basic, you know, and we're not going to make anything blow up or anything, but we're going to set a constant, which is going to be where on the screen did the person tap? You know, that's basically what we're doing. And we're going to choose this first option. So location in, and what are we looking at? The view, right? So where inside the view did they tap? And then we're going to grab that location, and then we're just going to put it in the console. We're just going to print out the location. And now this is kind of goofy, but real frankly, this is actually a very useful little thing. So a lot of times when people are app building and they're like, okay, well, we need to tap on it. Well, where's that spot on the screen? They just write a really simple little gesture recognizer like this, just to capture the position. All right, so you'll see how this operates when I launch it. So let's run it. All right, so now we have this up on the screen, and I just want to be really clear here. Yeah, so I'm not sure how we're going to do this. I think just clicking the mouse inside the app does it. No, it doesn't. Okay. Oh, no, it does. Okay. So you see now that I'm kind of clicking, and as I move around, what is it doing? It's capturing my position. All right. So let's talk a little bit about positioning on a screen for starters. When we, and I'm going to draw on the screen here for just a moment, just to kind of illustrate this point. So I got my little zoom drawing tool here. So normally when we're working on a screen, so this, I'm drawing over the top of the screen. I'm just, you know what, I'll use this space down here. When you guys learn how to do math, you learn about this thing called the Cartesian coordinate system, where we have the x-axis and the y-axis, right? This might look familiar from math and maybe enough to, you know, send you into hysterics about hating math, but an XY positioning system. And basically the center of a graph like this is the 0, 0 point. So 0 for X and Y are both right here, right in the middle. When I'm on this side of, that 0, 0 point, the values are positive. When I'm on that side, going horizontally, the values are negative. The same is true going up are positive values for Y, going down are negative values for Y, right? And then if you want to plot something on the chart, like, so for example, if I wanted to plot position 5X, 5Y, right? Like something you might note like this numerically, you would go like 5 over, whatever your system is, and 5 up, and you would find that point like right here. That would be 5, 5. So in other words, when I'm plotting stuff on an XY grid, a positive value in a regular mathematical format would be in the top right quadrant of that system, and then if you do both values are negative, they'd be down here somewhere. If the X's are negative and the Y's are positive, you're over here. If the X's are positive, but the Y's are negative, it's over here, right? So it's kind of like that. A screen works differently. Okay, so when we do a screen, the 0, 0 point of a screen is the top left corner. That's 0, 0. And then, sorry for bad drawing with the zoom pen. And the very, and you know what, I should probably, to illustrate the fact that we're working on a screen, a screen kind of looks like this, it's a square usually. And on an app, it's taller than it is wide. On a regular computer, it's wider than it is tall, but we're doing mostly app stuff here. So the 0, 0 point for X and Y is at the top left, meaning that X gets bigger going that way and Y gets bigger going that way, right? So this is Y. So these are positive values and these are positive values. So when I'm operating my app and I click up here near the top left, notice how the values are really small, right? So I don't know if I can hit the 0, 0 point in the app. I can probably get really close, right? Really, really close. But there's some areas, like I can't go into the safety area, so that's not included. But basically 0, 0 for this app, if I could draw it, would be kind of where my pointer is right now. It's kind of off the screen and you can't even access it, right? But any other spot on the screen will get, so the Y's, which is the second value, will get bigger as we go down. See how the second value, the Y's get bigger as I go down the screen, right? And then the X's get bigger as I go across the screen, which is the first number. So it starts really small, right? Like 5, and then I go over here and the number's really big, right? So it's a combination of those X, Y's, but this is how the coordinate system works on screen. In math, 0, 0's in the middle. On a screen, 0, 0's top left with positive X going across to the right, positive Y going down the screen. I don't know why they chose to do it this way. This is just how they do it. Now, if you want to like throw in another mind bender, right? So if you look at this little silly graphic here, if you were able to draw another perpendicular line that you could envision in 3D, I'm going to kind of make it like, I'm going to draw one in here, but it's going to go kind of up into space, basically, is it would come up like this, and that would be our Z axis, which would be depth. And the Z axis increases in conception when it comes forward from the screen. So there's a third dimension, which is a Z, that we can't really represent on two screens, but we do like 3D graphics, right? So there's a Z dimension, and every increased value of Z sits further forward on the plane of the screen. So before, when I took that text and moved it in front of the picture, what I was really doing is changing its Z value, probably from 0, where the screen is, to a higher number, so it would sit in front of the other objects. Okay, so that's kind of like my little, screen dimension thing, right? But if you've never done this before, right, and I realize, like Jomar, you're probably in that situation where you've never learned about the on-screen coordinate system. It really is pretty important. So when we're doing this clicking about, on the screen here, this little gesture recognizer that we threw in is just tracking our position. It shows you that your OS on your phone, when you have one of these overlays on your view, is tracking the position of where the user is on the screen and what they're doing, right? And so like if I'm moving my finger across the screen, it can track all those positions. And yeah, you can write code based on those positions, right? So like if I was dragging something and it fell off the screen, I could say, hey, you dragged it too far, it fell off the screen, right? You could write that code. So I think that's pretty fascinating. But this is very, very helpful, this little thing that we just wrote. If you were like writing a game and then you were like, okay, well, if the user taps here, they have, they're shooting somebody and killing them. If they tap over here, they missed, and how do you get that? Well, by tracking the position, simple as that. But very helpful for sure. The other thing that I think is kind of interesting is, and I'm very carefully looking at the next set of instructions here. I'm feeling that we should take a break and then we'll come back and finish up the rest of this because we've been going for almost 2 hours now. So we're going to take a break. It's a well-needed one, and we'll come back and resume. All right, we're back from break, and we're really kind of at the end of most of the activities for this, but I kind of want to show you where I'm at in the book. So I am in the student version of the book, and we had basically just finished this. So we're now, officially moving on to these pages, page 304, 305, etc. And this is really more informational than anything else. I mean, there is the ability here to basically do these actions, but we kind of have done these, and it's basically like when stuff's not working, right? Like to know where to go in the panels here. You're working with all these like outlets, and to be able to go to this panel, and in this case we're looking at the gesture recognizer, but if we were looking, let's say, at the button and all the controllers and stuff, just if you are having problems with them or these circles aren't connecting correctly, you can't just delete the code because it gets registered inside the application here. So you have to come over here and delete this as well. And what seems to work better is to delete this first and then delete the code. If you do it the other way, it's not quite so clean. And that is especially in the circumstance if you have to like redo something. I think that's probably the more important aspect of it. But they talk about that process here a little bit, and they also talk about the default actions and how to add a couple of other little things. Not super critical at this point. But if you want to try that last little piece, the instructions are there in the book. Just feel free, just give it a shot. But just kind of doing a holistic review of like how to really build an app, right? Because we're going to start doing this more and more now, where these are just kind of assumed that you know them in a sense. Here's kind of the basic steps of doing a GUI app, aside from having an idea of what to build, right? Usually you start by building your interface components. Like what is the app screen going to look like? And so, if you want buttons or text fields or pictures or whatever, you get those all on the screen and put it where you want. Next, you go into your code files and you create your outlets and your actions. If controls are going to be needed to be used that way, and they're going to trigger certain things to happen, you can control those pieces. So create your outlets, create your actions with all the defaults that you need. And then after those two things are in place, then you write the code for those actions and those controls, and then make sure that it all works. There is kind of the process of doing it incrementally too, and I've tried to do that as we went. Like we would add a thing and then we go test it, right? So that's kind of a thing. So sometimes you have to build and test things before you get to the final product, and it's kind of like a step-by-step procedure. So stick with it. When it comes to app design, it can be time consuming, but it can also be a whole lot of fun. So hopefully your app builds go well. This video will end right here, and I will start a fresh video for the next topic.